Hello everybody. Today's lesson is about the lymphoid organs. It's gonna be activity 5, page 123. Our immune system consists of special immune cells which carry out the immune responses and lymphoid organs. Those lymphoid organs are primary and secondary lymphoid organs. Starting with the primary lymphoid organs. The primary lymphoid organs are actually two. There are the bone marrow and the thymus. The bone marrow is the place or the site where the production and maturation of every single blood cell takes place, except for the T lymphocytes. The T lymphocytes actually are formed. They are produced in the bone marrow, but they do not undergo their maturation in the bone marrow. Instead, they undergo their maturation in the other primary lymphoid organ known as the thymus. So these are the two primary lymphoid organs. They are the bone marrow and the thymus. The function of the primary lymphoid organs is to produce and mature the immune cells that are responsible for carrying out the immune responses. Take a look into this document. The stem cells in the bone marrow are responsible for the production of special cells known as the pre-B lymphocytes and the pre-T lymphocytes. Also in the bone marrow, the pre-B lymphocytes are gonna possess these B cell receptors, which are going to change later to the antibodies to become, for the B lymphocyte to become a functional cell. So as you can notice, the process of production and maturation of the B lymphocytes takes place inside the bone marrow. As for the pre-T lymphocytes, they are produced in the stem cells of the bone marrow. However, they travel by blood to the thymus. Thymus is a special endocrine gland located in the neck region, and it is a very important organ for the maturation of the T lymphocytes. So the maturation of the T lymphocytes, where the T lymphocytes will possess their T cell receptors, is gonna take place in the thymus. So the B lymphocytes are produced and matured in the bone marrow. However, the T lymphocytes are produced in the bone marrow, but they mature in the thymus. B lymphocytes maturation. This is a very important document that shows the maturation of the B lymphocytes after being produced in the bone marrow. They are supposed to be matured in the bone marrow as well. Take a look into the maturation process. First step is that these B lymphocytes are going to form a big pool of these B lymphocytes, each having a specific receptor. After the formation of these receptors, these B lymphocytes are going to be exposed to self-antigens. The B lymphocytes that cannot match or cannot fix to the self-antigens are the B lymphocytes that should be remained inside the body. So they are going to be positively selected. Okay? While the ones that can bind to our self-antigens, to avoid autoimmunity, these B lymphocytes with receptors that can bind to our self-antigens are going to be eliminated, and this is known as a negative selection of these cells. So the pool of the B lymphocytes that we are going to be left with are the ones having specific B cell receptors that can bind to foreign antigens but cannot bind to self antigens. So this is what the B lymphocyte maturation is all about. So let me remind you that the B cell maturation, first of all, the B lymphocytes are going to be produced in the bone marrow, and then they are going to be matured also in the bone marrow. So for this maturation to take place, these B lymphocytes are going to possess specific receptors. They are going to be exposed to self-antigens. If they cannot bind to the self-antigens, they are going to be preserved. and they are going to be kept. They will form the pool of the B lymphocytes ready to start their immune battles, while the ones that can bind to our self-antigens are going to be eliminated, and otherwise they are going to undergo autoimmunity. So they are not supposed to be left inside our bodies. Let's go into the T lymphocyte maturation. The T lymphocytes, as we said before, are going to be produced in the bone marrow, but they are going to head towards the thymus to be matured. As you can see, the B lymphocytes, if we're talking about the B lymphocytes, the receptors of the B lymphocytes are the antibodies that are only supposed to be binding to the epitopes or the antigen determinants on specific foreign cells. As for the T lymphocytes function is to fight the infected body cells. So let's remember that the infected body cells were previously self cells. Self cells, which means they have self HLA, self MHC. So because they were infected, or sometimes in the case of cancer, the mutation at the level of the gene will allow these cells to be modified. So in the case of infected body cells or modified self cells, it is the job of the T lymphocytes to get rid of those cells. So the T lymphocytes should have a double recognition because they should bind to the self HLA on the surface of the modified or the infected cell, and also they should bind to the non-self antigen associated to this self HLA. So this is what we call a double recognition. So the first step in the maturation of the T lymphocytes is the possession of the CD4 or the CD8 that should be able to bind to the self HLA. So the ones that can bind to the self HLA are going to be positively selected, so they are going to be preserved, while the ones that cannot bind to the self HLA are useless, so they are going to be eliminated. So this is the first step in the maturation process of the T lymphocytes. So they are going to possess specific receptors. If these receptors can bind to the self HLA, the cells or the T lymphocytes having these receptors are going to be preserved, while if these T lymphocytes do not possess specific receptors that can bind to the self HLA, those are going to be eliminated, and this is known as negative selection. After that, the ones that have possessed the receptors capable of binding to the self HLA should be exposed to the self antigen associated to the self HLA. If these T lymphocytes were capable of binding to the self antigens on the self HLA, then they are going to cause autoimmunity. So in this case, they are going to attack our body cells. So those cells that can bind to the self HLA are going to be eliminated. This is what's known as the second negative selection. While the ones that cannot bind to the self peptide associated to the self HLA, those are the ones that are going to be able to fight the infected body cell, because they have the property of binding to the self HLA, which is associated to the non-self peptide. So these are the T lymphocytes that are going to be remained, and they are going to form the pool of the T lymphocytes ready to carry out their action. So the T lymphocyte maturation involves two steps. The T lymphocytes, first of all, are going to be produced in the bone marrow, and then they travel by blood into the thymus, where they are going to start their maturation process, which involves two steps, as we said. The first step is that they are going to possess receptors. Those receptors are going to be exposed to the self HLA. If they can match, they are going to be preserved. If they do not match, the T lymphocytes having receptors that cannot match to the self HLA are going to be eliminated. So this is the first step. Now, from the T lymphocytes which are kept, they are going to be exposed to self antigens. If they were able to bind to the self antigens, in this case, they are going to cause autoimmunity. In this case, they can attack our body cells. And this is not supposed to happen. So those cells are going to be eliminated, while the ones that cannot bind to the self peptide, this means that they can only bind to the non-self peptide associated to the self HLA. So in this case, those cells are going to be kept. So this is the T lymphocyte maturation. Secondary lymphoid organs, because we said that the primary lymphoid organs are the bone marrow and the thymus. With respect to the secondary lymphoid organs, this is the figure that shows the location of the thymus, which is one of the primary lymphoid organs, and the bone marrow inside the bone, which form the primary lymphoid organs. As for the secondary lymphoid organs, we are going to pass into the list of the secondary lymphoid organs, but you have to note that a very important secondary lymphoid organ is the spleen. We also have the lymph nodes. These lymph nodes are very important. They are distributed in various regions throughout the body, like the axillary regions, the neck regions, the anal regions, and in other different regions. They are very important nodes where the battles between the immune cells and the foreign cells takes place. Let's take a look into the difference between the primary and the secondary lymphoid organs. As we said before, the primary lymphoid organs include the thymus and the bone marrow, and they are the site where differentiation, proliferation, maturation of stem cells into immunocompetent cells takes place. When we say immunocompetent, we mean cells, immune cells ready to act. And they are also called central lymphoid organs, and of course they are the place where the lymphocytes are going to develop, where they are going to be produced and matured. As for the secondary lymphoid organs, they are the place where antigen is localized so that it can be effectively exposed to the mature lymphocytes. In other words, the places where the battles take place between the immune cells and the foreign cells are the secondary lymphoid organs. The adaptive or the specific immune responses take place in the secondary lymphoid organs. The most important lymphoid organs are the spleen, the lymph nodes, the tonsils, which are the two glands that you can see when you open your mouth in front of the mirror. These tonsils are part of the secondary lymphoid organs. The appendix, which is between the small and the large intestine, and the Peyer's patches, which are specific lymphatic tissues located within the small intestine. They are all among the secondary lymphoid organs where battles are going to take place between the immune cells and the foreign cells. You have to note that the lymphocytes, the B and the T lymphocytes, after being mature and after being immunocompetent and ready to act, they circulate continuously throughout the lymph and the bloodstream between different secondary organs in order to maintain a permanent surveillance against foreign antigens. So they all the time continuously search if there is any foreign antigen for them to undergo the process of specific immune response to get rid of this foreign antigen. The lymph nodes are sites of responses between the immune cells and the antigens coming from the lymph and from the infected tissues. The lymph, by the way, is a liquid. It's a colorless liquid formed from the extracellular fluid which is drained from the tissues. They are usually collected into special lymphatic vessels and they are drained through these lymphatic vessels. So the antigens which are carried by the lymph and the infected tissues usually come to the lymph nodes where the immune cells will be waiting for them to get rid of them and undergo the immune response necessary to eliminate them. Spleen, on the other hand, is the site of the responses taking place between the foreign antigens and the immune cells, but in this time the antigens shall be carried to the spleen by the blood stream. I hope that you enjoyed our lesson. Please study this activity carefully before solving its exercises. Bye, see you later.